Saint Martin de Porres was born on December 9th, 1579, in Lima, Peru. He was of mixed race, his father being white, and his mother Ana, who was black, was a former slave. Martin also had a sister named Juana, who was 2 years younger than him. Unfortunately, Martin's childhood was difficult. His father, Don Juan de Porres, was a nobleman and a soldier for the king, and he was often away on duty. Besides that, he was embarrassed of his dark-skinned children, inwardly unhappy that they resembled more of their mother than they did him. People of dark skin were not treated well or thought to be as worthy as white people. They usually weren't given the opportunity to be educated, so they didn't get good jobs to support their families. Most of the black people were very poor. Since Don Juan was away so much, most of the work fell on Ana to support the children. Then one day, Don Juan left his family. He gave his wife a small bag of coins, telling her he had to go away on business and wasn't sure when he would return. The small bag of coins didn't last long, and Ana was already a tired and hard-working woman. She became bitter and inwardly blamed the color of her children's skin for their father's leaving. She often complained of their poverty, the unfairness of life, and how things would be better if they were white instead of black. But Martin told his little sister, "Mother has made a mistake. It isn't the color of our skin that matters. It's the color of our souls. Juana, if we have pure souls, and we do everything we can to please God, there's no reason to feel sorry that we are poor and that Father went away and left us." Martin had a special love for the poor. Being so poor himself, he knew what it was like to be hungry. Therefore, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't help giving away the money his mother gave him to buy food away to the poor. She would get very angry with him and beat him. After a week since his last punishment, Ana gave Martin a few coins. "Can I trust you to go to the market and get something for dinner?" she asked. "I know you, Martin. You would give away every cent I make to beggars if I didn't watch you." And she was right, because although he promised to not give it away, he ran across an old woman who was even poorer than he was. The poor old woman hadn't eaten in 3 days, so Martin gave her the money and then went to the church of Santo Domingo to pray that his mother wouldn't be too angry that he once again disobeyed. Martin was naturally pious and cheerful. When he wasn't needed at home, he loved to pray in the church. It didn't bother him much when people called him a good-for-nothing, because he knew God loved him. He also knew God loved color, and that was why he made so many people of different skin colors. Then one day, something good happened. Don Juan had been in the city of Guayaquil in Ecuador, and he had a conversion. With this conversion came true repentance for how he treated his family. He returned home to his wife and children and apologized for all he had done. His family was happy he was back, and Don Juan became a good husband and father. He dressed up his children and wife in fine clothes, and they were no longer hungry. To make up for lost time, he brought his children along with him whenever he had to go away on business. He was no longer ashamed of them, but proud. One day, he decided the children must learn to read and write. He had a job to do in Ecuador, and had an uncle that his children could stay with while he was away, since the job was too dangerous. In the meantime, the children could go to school. The uncle, Don Diego, was initially surprised to meet his black niece and nephew, but loved them instantly. In his fine home, the children were taught by a private tutor how to read and write and enjoyed nice things. They stayed with him for 2 years, but then their father decided that while Juana would stay with their uncle, who had grown attached to the children, Martin would go home to his mother. Don Juan Diego would continue to support Juana until she was old enough to marry, and then make sure she met a good man. And Martin would be able to help his mother, who had been alone all this time. Martin was 10 years old by the time he returned home, and he found that his mother had moved in with a friend. He also found that his mother had changed. She was no longer tired and harsh with him, but proud of who he was and loving. Before Martin returned home, his father had asked him what Martin wanted to be when he grew up. Martin said he would like to be a doctor, and so his father arranged with the town doctor to let Martin be his apprentice. It was easier for Martin to live nearby the doctor, so he moved in with a woman named Ventura de Luna. He was a very good housemate. He never complained or asked for anything. The only thing he asked for were candles, which he offered to pay for. The good woman told him he could use as many candles as he needed, and often she saw light from under his door at night. Thinking that he was reading, she was going to tell him one night that he needed his sleep, so she peeked inside the room. There she saw the young boy deep in prayer. She was stunned that this is what the boy did every night for hours before going to bed. When Martin was 15, he felt his interests change. He enjoyed his work with the doctor and learned a lot, but he had a great desire to serve. He offered his services as a helper in the monastery, doing odd jobs that were too small for everyone else. Martin had no desire to be a priest or even a lay brother. He only wanted to serve. In the monastery, Martin was a barber for the priests and brothers. Over 200 brothers were living in the monastery, so Martin was always busy cutting someone's hair. All the brothers were required to have the same haircut, cut short all around the head. One particular brother liked his hair long on the sides. When Martin cut it short, the brother became very angry, calling Martin a little fool. Martin said, "I'm sorry, Brother James, but you know I have to cut your hair the way the rule says, short all around." The brother was still angry and walked off in a huff, but Martin kept cutting hair the way he was supposed to, even if it meant making some of the brothers mad. As the years passed, Father Prior also assigned Martin to take care of the sick. Martin was only too happy to comply, especially since he had medical experience while he worked with a doctor. Not all the brothers were kind to Martin, having grown up with prejudice, but they would all soon learn that God wanted to make Martin special. One day, Father Pedro was very sick with a bad leg infection, and his leg would need to be taken off. Besides this, he was in constant pain. He became depressed and yelled at anyone who tried to come into the room to take care of him. Martin was told to try to cheer Father Pedro up so that he would eat. After praying for a moment, Martin was hit with the inspiration to make Father Pedro a salad with capers. Entering the room and ignoring the threats and grumbles to go away, Martin said, "But Father, I made you a fresh salad with capers. Won't you even look at it?" Father Pedro perked up. "How did you know that this is what I've been wanting all day, boy?" Not only was the salad delicious, but he said he would like it again the next day. This cheered him up so much that he allowed Martin to wash his sore leg with a little water and bandage it with a clean bandage. Within a few hours, his leg was healed and he was able to walk on it. He attributed this miracle to Martin, even though Martin insisted he had nothing to do with it. Another time, the monastery had a mice problem, and Martin was told to lay poison out to get rid of them. Brother Miguel was especially upset about the mice because they had chewed up all the altar cloths in the sacristy. Martin felt bad about this, but he didn't want to kill the mice, who were only acting out of hunger. So he waited for one of the mice to come out, and then called it over. "Come here, my little brother," he said. "I have something very important to tell you." The mouse scampered up to him, and Martin told the mouse to tell the other mice to go to the barn where they would live instead of the monastery. He promised if the mice obeyed, he would make sure they would never go hungry. Suddenly, all the mice and rats from every hiding place came out at once, startling the brothers. The mice ran for the barn, where they stayed from that time on. Brother Miguel said, "I never could have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. They all came running out of their holes to follow their leader. There was a real army of them marching out of the monastery to the barn." This wasn't the only miracle regarding to animals. Martin was able to communicate with animals and would tend to any birds or dogs that came to him with broken limbs. He kept them in his room until they were well again. Martin had been at the monastery for 9 years when he learned that the monastery was in financial trouble. He noticed the father prior leaving with expensive paintings to sell at the market. Martin had an idea and ran after the prior, saying, "Fathers, don't sell the pictures, sell me instead." Thinking that some of the other less kind brothers put this idea in Martin's head, he asked him who put him up to this. "No one, Father," Martin answered. "I've been praying about this, and the idea came to me that you could find someone at the market who would buy me." The father prior told Martin that he would not sell him, and then, much to Martin's surprise and confusion, he told Martin that he wanted him to take a little break from the monastery. Martin didn't want to go, but under obedience, he went and spent some time in the friar's country house nearby. When he returned 2 weeks later, the father prior surprised him again. He told Martin that he was to become a lay brother, a member of the First Order of St. Dominic. Martin initially protested, feeling that this was too high of a status for him, but he was ordered to become a brother, and so Martin took his vows. Most of the brothers were happy and in agreement with this decision, but there were those who were not happy and treated Martin poorly. One of the brothers called him a mulatto dog. Martin loved the poor, and it was he who had the honor of feeding them. Since so many poor came to the monastery to be fed, Martin would beg for alms so that he could buy food for the poor. Because of this, he was able to feed up to 160 people every day. And he didn't forget his promise to the mice. He would go to the barn, where now dogs and stray cats also stayed, and fed them. None of the animals ever went after each other, though, because Martin told them they must all get along. Martin also took care of the sick outside of the monastery, and many miracles took place. Often he cured people with just a glass of water. Another time, he took a beggar who was full of ulcers to his room. When a brother reproved him for this, Martin said, "Compassion, my dear brother, is preferable to cleanliness." For the rest of his years at the monastery, Martin took care of the sick. When the epidemic struck Lima, 60 brothers were sick. Martin tended to them all, and since they were in quarantine, Martin had the ability to walk through locked doors to tend to the sick men. More than once, one of the brothers attested to this. He also had the gift of bilocation, where he could be in 2 places at the same time. Many times, people would visit the monastery at Lima, insisting they had seen Brother Martin. Some of these people were very far away from Peru. He was reported to be seen in Mexico, Japan, and the Philippines. Needless to say, Martin had a deep prayer life, and here too there were many miracles. One time, as he knelt before the tabernacle in adoration, the ground where he was praying caught on fire. He was so deeply in ecstasy that he didn't even notice brothers running around, frantically trying to put out the fire. Another time, when he was contemplating the crucifixion, the brothers saw him rise 8 feet off the ground to pray face to face with the crucifix. One day, on a holy day, he took the other brothers out for a picnic because on holy days, they always did something special. They told stories and played games and eventually lost track of the time. They were supposed to be back at the monastery for prayers at 6 o'clock, but they were miles away from the monastery and they knew they would never make it back on time. One of the brothers attests, "None of us knew how he did it. One minute we were in the country, worried about being late. The next, we were here at the monastery, on our way to the chapel with everyone else. It was a real miracle." We already know that God cured many people through Martin, but one time, he had Martin bring one of the brothers who had died back to life. This particular brother had been asking for Martin as he lay dying, but Martin wasn't there at the time and was gone for the day. When he finally returned, he was told of Brother Thomas's death. Martin only said, "Are you sure he's dead?" "Dead? Of course he's dead. He's been dead for an hour, and it's time to say prayers and prepare the body." Alone in the room with the body, Martin filled a basin of water, but then he felt inspired to call the name of Brother Thomas. Little by little, life came back into the body, and soon Brother Thomas was asking for something to eat. But all of these miracles were not what made Martin holy, and although he knew that he had been blessed with special gifts, the best gift of all was knowing that he was loved by God. He told many people, especially people of different race, how much they were loved by God. So no matter how popular and famous he only became more humble. He is often shown holding a broomstick because he considered all work to be sacred. He continued the laundry and the cleaning, taking care of the sick and animals, and thanks to donations, he was even able to open an orphanage for boys and girls. Toward the end of his life, Martin began to get sick with fevers. But in between illnesses, he continued to do what he could for the brothers and the poor. One of the priests, Father Cyprian, was the nephew of the Mexican archbishop, and he told Martin that the archbishop wished for Martin to move in with him. Martin replied that he couldn't understand why the archbishop would want him to move in with him, and besides, he wouldn't be able to, because he was going to die in 4 days. If anyone else had said such a thing, they would have been laughed at. But so many of Martin's prophecies had come true that the brothers learned to take him seriously. A few days later, they saw Martin walking around with a brand new habit. He had always worn the oldest and most tattered habit, so the brothers didn't understand this sudden change and asked him about it. "It's just a new habit for my burial," he explained. The brothers looked at each other in confusion because at the moment, Martin seemed to be okay. But the next day, Martin was in bed dying. News spread around town that Brother Martin was dying, and everyone in every station of life came to the monastery to pray. Martin went through the temptations that come with dying, being afraid, and the temptation to doubt God's mercy. But the Blessed Mother and Saint Dominic appeared to him to console him. Hours later, the bells were rung and the community gathered to say the last prayers around Martin's bed. He died on November 3rd, 1639, at the age of 59. God had a few final miracles to happen through St. Martin, even after his death. As Father Cyprian sat with the body all night praying, he begged him to send some sort of sign to console them that he was in heaven. As he prayed, he placed his hand on Martin's body. It had been cold and stiff after hours since his death, but to his amazement, Martin's body became warm again. The fingers that held the crucifix were no longer stiff, and his face had more color in it. Although he wasn't alive, he looked like he was only sleeping. His body stayed warm and natural looking as all the people in Lima passed by his body to say one more prayer and one last goodbye. People also noticed a mysterious perfume that came from the body. Many people had brought scissors along, and as they passed Martin's body, they took snippets from his habit. Soon, the new habit Martin had put on for death was in tatters. The brothers had to change the habit a couple times, just for it to be cut up again by the people. One woman named Dona Catherine came to visit the body of St. Martin, hoping for a cure. She had a lame arm that caused her a lot of pain. She was a noble woman and felt nervous that since she wasn't poor like all the other people Martin had cured, that maybe Martin would pass her by. But when it was her turn, she knelt by the body and said a prayer, and then took the warm hand of Martin and pressed it to her paralyzed arm. Suddenly, warmth flooded through her arm and the pain went away. She was cured.